Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tony Mancini, and welcome to the Environment Sustainability Standing Committee. It's December the 15th, and it's 1 o'clock. I'd like to call this meeting to order. First, we'd like to acknowledge that we are in Mi'kma'ki, the territory and ancestral homeland of the Mi'kmaq Nation. Our relationship is based on a series of peace and friendship treaties between the Mi'kmaq Nation and the Crown dating back to 1725. In Nova Scotia, we recognize that we are all treaty people. The first item on the agenda is an election for the chair, the annual election for chair and vice chair. So I'm going to hand this over to the legislative assistant. Haruka, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So now I will open up the floor for nominations for the position of the chair.
I would like to nominate Councillor Mancini.
Moved by Councillor Moore, seconded by Councillor Lovelace, that Councillor Mancini is nominated as the chair. So Councillor Mancini, would you accept the nomination?
I do accept. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you. Are there any further nominations? I will call for 3 more times. Are there any further nominations? Are there any further nominations? For the last time, are there any further nominations? Seeing none, then I will ask for councillors to move the motion that you see on your screen.
I move that Councillor Mancini be appointed as chair of the Environment and Sustainability Standing Committee.
Second.
Thank you.
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Seeing none, then Councillor Mancini, you're acclaimed as the chair.
Thank you, Haruka. Thank you, colleagues. I truly appreciate this, even though it's back-to-back. One of the items that's true and dear to my heart is the topic that we're going to be discussing today, but along with that is the file on extended producer responsibility. So I appreciate that, and thanks very much. To carry on, we need now to appoint a vice chair, so we're looking for nominations from the floor. So would anybody like to nominate, bring forward a nomination? Deputy Mayor, you have the floor.
Yes, I wish to bring forward a nomination for Councillor Catherine Morse.
Second by Councillor Austin. Are there any other nominations? Are there other nominations? Any other nominations? Councillor Morse, do you accept that nomination?
I do, thank you.
Deputy Mayor, would you read the motion that's on the screen, please?
Absolument. I move that Councillor Morse be appointed as Vice Chair of the Environment and Sustainability Standing Committee.
Do we have a seconder? A seconder by Catherine, that was a Kathy Austin. I combined the two by Councillor Dale Gammon. All those in favor? Anyone opposed? We now have Vice Chair. That's fantastic. Yep.
Technical problem that this is not working. My screen,
Oh, your screen isn't?
the system's not working.
Do you want to just pop into?
Can somebody fix that or?
Yep.
Okay.
And if you want to, you can always pop into your neighbor's desk. You can pop into your neighbor's desk if you need to see a screen quickly, and we'll get that fixed. Thank you.
Password protected.
Yeah, you can log in as yourself. The only difference will be, Kathy, is when you speak, it'll have your neighbor's name on it. But
We'll see.
yeah. All right, that's fantastic. Thank you, Councillor Morris. Let's take a look at number 2, approval of the minutes from December the 2nd. Do we have approval for the minutes from December the 2nd? Can someone move that, please? Deputy Mayor, and seconded by? All those in favor of the minutes? Aye. We now have approved minutes. Approval of the order of business and approval of additions and deletions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There is no proposed addition or deletion to the agenda.
Great, thank you. Any from committee members? A move by Councillor Austin, seconded by the Deputy Mayor.
No, I
Oh,
wanted
sorry.
to speak.
Oh, my apologies. Go ahead. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was wondering if we could move the public participation component up in the agenda. I know there's at least one fellow here who's looking to speak on Halifax, and so in the past, we've usually, if we know that in advance, we've been flexible about moving that. So I'm wondering if the committee would agree to do public participation first.
We'll do after, let's see, when we get to before reports, we'll do the public participation. Haruka, is that okay? Okay, so be it. Thank you, Councillor. So can we move the order of business? Now we'll do Councillor Austin, second by the Deputy Mayor. All in favor? Now we have an agenda. Thank you very much. Any business arising out of the minutes? Seeing none, call for declaration of conflict of interest. Seeing none, motions of reconsideration, motions of rescission, consideration deferred business, and notice of table matters all fall into the none category. Madam Clerk, are there any correspondence or petitions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, there is one correspondence that was received and circulated to the members of the committee this morning.
Okay, thank you. Colleagues, any petitions? Seeing none. So before we go to the presentation by Ms. Norton, we'll allow the public participation. How's that? So if anybody would wish to speak that's in the chambers here today, just come forward, state your name and the community you come from, and you've got 5 minutes. And you can take either one of the chairs, sir. And then our clerk will let you know you'll have 5 minutes, and the clerk will let you know when you have 30 seconds left, and she rules with a strong arm, so be careful if you go over time. Sir, welcome to City Hall, and welcome to the Environment Committee. If you state your name and the community you come from.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My name is Seo Gaudet. I come from Dartmouth. I'm just pulling up my speech. I was not expecting to go first today.
Well, you are from Dartmouth, and we do give a privilege for those from Dartmouth. And
Perfect.
Right.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay. Partly I was intending to do this in reaction to some of the other things that we'd seen, but we'll go with it. So good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to present today. My name is Seo Gaudet. I'm a professional economist and policy analyst with 32 years experience in the areas of environmental policy, human resources development policy, and tax policy in the federal context. I'd like to congratulate you and your council colleagues, as well as the city staff who worked on it, on the Halifax plan. It's an ambitious, holistic, and practical plan to help meet one of the defining public policy challenges of our time. It's an impressive document, and I strongly support it. The 3 E's of policy development are a very widely accepted standard of good policy development. Policies should be effective, that means they achieve the objective. They should be efficient, they do it at least cost, which means they can do more for a given budget. They should be equitable, the costs and benefits of the program are shared fairly between those who can most and those who can least afford them. Halifax places, in my reading, great emphasis on effectiveness and equity. Much time, effort, and thought clearly went into developing these aspects, including intensive community consultation to help ensure equity and promote public engagement. What was largely overlooked, in my opinion, is the notion of efficient policies and programs that achieve the most efficient reductions, achieve the most emission reductions for any given budget. That will be especially important because large parts of the Halifax budget will need to be devoted to adaptation and the costs of running the program, including, very importantly, capacity building. A second and equally important reason why we should care about efficiency is transparency and accountability to taxpayers. For example, I, as a homeowner, am being asked to pay a 3% premium on my property tax bill for at least the next 10 years in the climate of rising property valuations. And while I would gladly pay more, I will emphasize I would gladly pay more, I would like to know whether my investment in this program is delivering the maximum amount of GHG reductions for the money invested. If it is not, and if there are good reasons for that, I would like to know that as well. So how would we know whether any particular element of the mitigation policy package is efficient? The standard measure is cost per ton. That's the cost of the policy divided by the tons of avoided GHGs. Again, choosing relatively efficient over relatively inefficient policies helps to keep total costs down and provides the opportunity to do more with less, whatever the budget allocation is that we are working within. At the end of the day, we will have succeeded in reducing more GHGs if we choose more efficient policies and programs. The timing of programs is also a key consideration if we want to maximize emission reductions over the entire lifetime of Halifax. Cost per ton estimates can also help inform these timing decisions. For example, here in Nova Scotia, we produce a high proportion of electricity with fossil fuels, and that proportion will be declining over time. This has definite implications for the timing of programs. For example, programs to switch to electric cars should come in later years of the program, when the power grid will be cleaner. By contrast, rooftop solar panels provide the greatest GHG benefits when the grid is dirty because they are replacing dirty electricity. Some of the cheapest reductions will come from tougher building efficiency standards. We should not be waiting until 2030 to do this, especially if it means that buildings built between now and 2030 will need further retrofits by 2040. We should do that as soon as possible. Of course, cost per ton estimates are not the only consideration in deciding the best mitigation options. Effectiveness and equity will always play a role, and there may in some cases be co-benefits that tip the scale toward less cost-efficient policies and programs. However, cost per ton estimates should always be considered an important part of the decision, and they should be publicly reported. Remember that whenever we choose to support other policy objectives with mitigation dollars, and that costs more, we need to acknowledge that we will be purchasing fewer GHG reductions with those dollars.
20 seconds left.
Action 43 of the Halifax Action Plan proposes to develop an annual indicators report and report annually on progress. Given its key importance in assessing the efficiency of climate actions, I would like to strongly suggest that those indicators include cost per ton estimates of mitigation actions that have been or are proposed to be undertaken at each part of the program. I would like to leave you with one final thought. If we want to meet our emissions reductions goals, we will need well-designed and implemented policies and programs. This brings me to the subject of capacity. The best policies come from the best analysis. That means hiring analysts. We are behind on that. If we want to meet our goals, funding and filling policy and program analysis positions should be considered extremely urgent, and I am willing to help with any of the above on a pro bono basis. This is very important work, and it's well underway, thanks to your efforts and the efforts of municipal staff. I believe that if we do it right, Halifax can not only achieve its climate goals, but can be a leader in effective and efficient and equitable climate policy and implementation, and an example to other jurisdictions. Thank you for your time.
Mr. Gidgat, thank you very much for your thoughts and your opinions. We truly appreciate it, and your offer to help. When we heard the words pro bono, I saw the ears perk up behind you, so that's always good. Thank you, Mr. Gidgat. I truly appreciate your time, and you're welcome to stay. Hopefully you will for the
I will.
rest.
Yeah, I definitely will. Very interested.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to come forward and speak? Would anybody else like to come forward and speak? Anybody else come forward and speak? Do we have anybody online, Haruka?
No one pre-registered to speak by phone, but please confirm by asking 3 times.
Would anybody online like to speak? If there is anybody online would like to speak? And if there's anybody online, would you like to speak? So, hearing none. Thank you for that. Let's move on to the rest of the agenda. We're now at 10.3.1. Climate Emergency Mode for Government, and we have Ms. Emma Norton from Climate Emergency Unit to come forward. Emma, good to see you. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's nice to be in person.
Yeah, it is. For now, I think it goes away tomorrow, so
Oh, okay.
for a short time. Emma, do you have a presentation?
I do.
Yeah, I'm gonna let you get
Ruka
that
set
queued
it
up.
for me. Thank you.
Introduce yourself, your organization, and you have 10 minutes, and the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you. Should I leave my mask on? Okay.
Yeah.
I'd prefer that for this. Thanks. Councilors, Deputy Mayor, thank you so much for having me today. My name is Emma Norton. I am from District 5, Councilor Austin's district. Hello. The desired outcome of my presentation is a motion to fully fund Halifax and provide this committee, and hopefully eventually all of council, with a lens against which to measure whether the policies you are passing measure up to the climate emergency declaration you passed in 2019. I would also ask that you pay particular attention to creating the capacity within your government to implement Halifax by, quote, mainstreaming climate into municipal operations and governance and capacity for action. Both of these actions were outlined in the Halifax report as essential yet under-resourced and not on track to succeed. I am a director at the Climate Emergency Unit, a 5-year project of the David Suzuki Institute, note, not the David Suzuki Foundation. This project was sparked by Seth Klein's book, A Good War, which compares the mobilization of Canada during the Second World War to the mobilization required for the climate crisis. My team's job is to push all levels of government into climate emergency mode. We are militantly optimistic, yet we tell the truth about the gravity of the crisis we are in. And we are here to help create the political will for elected officials like yourselves to become the leaders that we need you to be right now. I believe we can all confidently say that we are in a climate emergency. Your council declared a climate emergency in January 2019. However, I'm also going to be bold and say that you are not acting like you are in a climate emergency. This is an ecological crisis, but, and I emphasize this for all of you, it is equally a human and social justice crisis and a civilization threat. Due to inaction, we have locked ourselves into a different world than the one that you and I have come to know. And we can still prevent this world from becoming uninhabitable. The Climate Emergency Unit has developed a framework for leaders like you and all institutions to better understand what emergency mode looks like. It stands on 4 markers that were reflected during the Second World War and for the most part during the COVID-19 pandemic, and 2 more that are necessary in today's society. Here's what we need to do. Number 1, spend what it takes to win. When C.D. Howe, the minister who oversaw Canada's wartime military production, was pressed about government spending, he famously replied, "If we lose the war, nothing will matter." The same is true today for the climate crisis. Some ways that you can make sure you are spending what it takes to win is to create a carbon budget. Every year that we do not reduce our carbon emissions, we use up much more of our carbon budget and make next year's action even more expensive. We need to invest now. What is a carbon budget? The carbon budget is the amount of CO2 that humanity can emit while still having a chance to contain global warming within 1.5 degrees, compared with pre-industrial levels, as advocated by the Paris Agreement. There is a global carbon budget that can be translated to local jurisdictions, and according to the Halifax report that you'll hear about today, Halifax will use up its own carbon budget by 2028. That's very little time, if you don't change your course. Some investments you need to make will include direct greenhouse gas reductions, but you need to also make sure you hit a certain number of tons of reduction every year. The IPCC report suggests a 10% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions every year to stay within our carbon budget. You can add a climate go, no-go lens to every budget decision. If your municipal funds and staff pensions and endowments continue to invest in fossil fuels, they are at risk. I suggest removing them from fossil fuel investments. You can reallocate funds from greenhouse gas intensive projects to greenhouse gas reduction projects. Marker number 2, I should say to my slides, we are directed mostly at provincial and federal governments. The 2% of GDP is harder to translate to the municipal level, but I'm happy to discuss that further. New institutions to get the job done. During World War II, starting from a base of virtually nothing, the Canadian economy and its labor force pumped out a volume of military equipment that is simply mind-blowing. Remarkably, the Canadian government established 28 crown corporations to meet the supply and munition requirements for the war effort. We can do something similar at every level of government right now. I believe your R3 team is a really good example of a new institution that can help to get the job done. I think Halifax is looking into that. I would like to see that our 3 team produce an emergency level program. That's rich of me to say since I sit on it and we're trying very hard. But we were restricted by the pressures put on us by Council's lack of ambition. And this is where I reiterate that according to the Halifax report, only 14% of your actions are adequately resourced and 20% are on track. You need to implement the actions related to government structure and mainstream climate into all municipal operations. I loved the recommendation from the previous speaker to hire analysts. Marker number 3. Move from voluntary policies to mandatory measures. We encourage change, we incentivize change, we offer rebates, we send price signals, but what we have decidedly not done is require change. This is true for almost all of your municipal climate policies. You are trying to incentivize by our way to victory, and let me say, it won't work. That means we need policies that reflect no new on-site fossil fuels. We need to be looking at retrofits and new builds that need to be net zero. I recognize the jurisdiction of the province here. And it means saying no to sprawl and highway expansion so that we don't lock ourselves into development paths that take us into the opposite direction of where we urgently need to go. Also, things like the municipality should no longer be buying internal combustion engine vehicles at this point in 2021. Oh, skipped a slide. Marker number 4 is tell the truth. The leaders that mobilized us and the public in World War II, it took them leadership to speak to us. In frequency and tone, in words and in action, emergencies need to look and sound and feel like emergencies. The communication about the climate plan from Halifax has been very lackluster. We know that many constituents do not even know that you have a climate plan. We know that during the COVID-19 pandemic, we were brought by our leaders into emergency mode with consistent messaging, communication every single day. We heard about it through all our news outlets. We need to hear that same level of urgency in our climate communications today. You can't be in good climate emergency mode and implement climate policies without a good communications plan. And that's going to build the solidarity and support that you require from your constituents to move forward. So those 4 markers were met during the Second World War and largely during the pandemic, but they're not being met now by any level of government. The climate mobilization must also include 2 more markers: leaving no one behind. Housing people, making sure green technology is affordable, that's all essential to the transition. To quote my colleague Seth, we cannot ask people to separate their fears about the climate crisis from the other affordability anxieties, economic pressures, and systemic crises they face. At a very basic level, inequality undermines trust that we are all in this together. Many doubt the task at hand will be undertaken in a fair manner. It is hard to rally the public if many believe the rich are merely buying their way out of making change, fortifying their homes, walling off their communities, or purchasing carbon offsets in the hopes that others will lower their actual emissions. Equally troubling is a cultural narrative that casts climate action as part of an elite project that sees the poor or those currently working in the fossil fuel sector as expendable. Whatever policies we put in place to reduce greenhouse gas emissions also require an equity lens, and I've said this about any revenue actions that you're looking to take. And I would also say that this includes reallocation from some harmful activities like the police. So it's important when we're making budget decisions to consider where we need to reallocate funds from. And finally, Indigenous leadership. I know this can be quite complex, and I think it's all top of mind for us. I heard you make the land acknowledgement at the beginning, but as our mainstream politics dodge meaningful and coherent climate action over and over again, it is the assertion of Indigenous title and rights that is buying us time. Slowly, and they're blocking new fossil fuel projects until our larger politics come into compliance with the climate science. A new report from the Indigenous Environment Network and the Oil Change International finds that Indigenous resistance has stopped or delayed greenhouse gas emissions equivalent to at least 1/4 of annual US and Canadian emissions, which is a very impressive number, and we all owe those people who are on the front lines a great deal of gratitude. And I hope that whatever motions we put forward, take that into consideration about who we need to be listening to and taking leadership and advice from. So I'll finish by saying we need you, our elected officials, to step up to the challenge ahead of us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emma. I truly appreciate the presentation. The slide deck, can you share that with us? If you share that, the clerk's office does have it, and then we'll make sure that gets circulated to not only this committee, but to our colleagues on council. Colleagues, does everyone have any questions for Ms. Norton? I'm seeing, yeah, everybody does. That's good. That's a good sign. Councillor Austin, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Emma, for coming today and presenting to us, and also being blunt about it with us. I just had one question. I mean, a lot of things that you've hit on are questions that I have for staff when they come forward and present the report. But for you, I was wondering, you know, you referenced in early in your presentation that, you know, it's a presentation that's also geared for provincial and federal audiences. At the municipal level, you know, it can be quite frustrating at times because the levers that we have available to us, just from a practical point of view, are much more limited. And I'm just curious if you could pick anything out of Halifax for us. Like, what would you identify as top priority from a municipal perspective, knowing we can't do things like charge a congestion charge, like for financing, for example, or change the building code, like in direct control? Is there anything that stands out?
Can you hear me? Oh, I was holding that button this entire time. I didn't know I needed to hold it.
Would you like to do the whole presentation all over again now that you know the button?
Yes, please. If you did it 3 times, it sticks, right? Well, I think I would agree with the prioritization of the Halifax team that you need to focus on buildings. It's pretty amazing, in a bad way, that we still burn oil in Halifax to heat our homes. If you can find a way to reduce the consumption of oil or eliminate oil consumption and make sure that no new builds install oil furnaces or natural gas, that would be a huge step forward.
Okay, thank you for that, and apologies for, you know, the speculative sort of question, but I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Next is Deputy Mayor. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It is so good to see you, Emma. Thank you for your presentation. I have a couple of questions. So I'm just wondering if you have spoken with other councillors, other councils across the province. And, you know, I think part of, as a member of the Nova Scotia Federation of Municipalities, you know, one of the things we're seeing is a real disparity around the ability, the capacity to make these changes, especially in rural communities. Certainly the will is there. It's just not having the capacity. And so while HRM can be a leader, and certainly is a leader in our climate action plan, the ability for us to also assist those other smaller municipalities to come along when we don't have, you know, that umbrella change when it comes to provincial government and making those policy and regulatory changes. So I know, you know, it's kind of like we're coming up from underneath to make those changes and enforce leadership at the provincial level. And doing that together is difficult because not everyone has the same capacity. So I did just want to ask you a question about, you mentioned the R3 team and it being restricted. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit from your perspective, what could we do to release some of those challenges and barriers so that the team can move forward more effectively? And the last thing I just wanted to say was around leave no one behind. You know, it's so difficult to be making changes that cost money and increasing that economic insecurity for people while at the same time, you know, knowing that we absolutely have to your last point, you know, other folks the Indigenous community is doing us a great favor, but that is a delay because of course there will be sweeping changes and could be sweeping regulatory changes in the future from the federal government, you know, or the US government, or external changes that we have no power over. So again, it kind of comes back to the municipality as far as like, where do we get this jurisdictional power that we currently don't have? I know it's a big question, but I know it's something that you've been thinking about. And although your presentation is geared towards those other levels of government and, you know, a municipality being a creature of the province, in a sense, we're kind of a decentralized unit of provincial government in Nova Scotia. And so, again, I think we're, in a sense, we sort of have to lead from behind and find ways to capture that power and mobilize the community to make change. If that makes sense. Again, it's so great to see you.
It's lovely to see you too. Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah, thank you.
As it's been a while since I've seen everyone in this pandemic, but okay, those are some great questions. Thank you. In terms of talking to other municipalities, I presented to Kentville's council on Monday, but in my capacity as under the climate emergency unit, I haven't done a whole lot. I started this job in April.
Okay.
But I used to work for Quest. Quest is an organization that does energy planning for municipalities across Canada. And one of my jobs was to run a municipal energy learning group here in Nova Scotia. So I worked with the municipalities to put forward a long list of recommendations for the province in regards to the recently passed, it's had so many names, Environmental Goals and Climate Change Reduction Act.
Okay. Yeah.
And so there are some recommendations in there which I would like to revisit eventually, and which I would like to bring back to our current environment minister, that are essential for giving you the jurisdiction, all municipalities the jurisdiction and more power to be able to make those moves. It's pretty amazing the lack of capacity for most municipalities to be able to even have a climate plan or an inventory. The R3 team restrictions, you know, I think that they are, I think I would like to just have a conversation about that with the R3 team and the staff who engage with it, because being able to clearly articulate them, as I said, it's kind of, I feel, at least when I'm talking to it, that I need to convince council that retrofits and investing a significant amount of money in retrofits is a worthy cause. Retrofits, most deep energy retrofits that need to happen are not going to meet your cost per ton analysis that was announced earlier, because we've moved beyond low-hanging fruit. We need to be moving into significant greenhouse gas emission reduction targets or actions that might take 25 years to pay back, right? Yeah. And I've done the per ton analysis for deep energy retrofits, and it's not something I want to repeat to you, but that doesn't include the non-energy or non-cost saving benefit. There's cost savings for the people that live there. There's health savings. In terms of leaving no one behind, we lost 600 Canadians this year in BC during the heat dome, the deadliest weather event that our country has ever seen. And those people probably would have survived if they'd had a heat pump. If those homes had been converted from natural gas to a heat pump, which has cooling technology, they would probably still be with us. And most of those people that died were low-income seniors, right? So when we talk about leaving no one behind, a lot of the climate action that we're talking about is actually going to allow some of our most vulnerable populations to survive. And so there's a lot of benefits to our population, to your constituents, that come from climate action that we need to be a lot better at articulating. And so for us to be able to move successfully forward with an amazing retrofit program and with the amazing climate plan that you have, you need great communications. And that's gonna cost a lot of money, and you're not gonna be able to count the direct GHG savings from that. But you need to make, the walking the line of we are in a crisis, but there's hope and it's better on the other side, that communications that needs to be articulated. But in terms, and I would also say whatever is put forward by the R3 team is going to be amazing. I've seen it. They're doing incredible work. I don't want to make it sound like that's not awesome work.
Okay.
I just feel like I'm excited to see where the program will go.
Oh, perfect. Well, come back to us if we can help you, and certainly make some changes to make sure that you can do the best work that we need you to do. Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sorry, I didn't answer all your questions.
Oh, sorry. I just get so excited. Yes.
Yeah, I'm glad I wrote notes. So you asked me about the piece about leave no one behind and putting economic pressures on people. The point about leaving no one behind is that any climate policy has to be matched with social infrastructure policy. So when, that means, so like the climate policy that we have discussed today, the climate plan includes increased public transit. We know that it improves people's well-being, it reduces, it helps reduce poverty, it helps, it is an essential leave no one behind piece. Retrofits, I think when we're talking about the amount of money that the municipality is going to have to put into retrofits, that's going to come back. There's an immense number of savings for people involved in that. And Nova Scotia is leading the country in terms of retrofits for low-income homeowners and low-income tenants. And maybe that's a message that we can be putting out there more often as well. I already made my point about heat pumps, and lately there's been the conversation around the climate tax. I really don't want the conversation today to become about that because it's so much bigger. But I would be curious about the jurisdiction. The jurisdiction question is always a question. I would be curious about your ability to add income tax brackets to the property tax to make it more progressive and take the pressure off of those low-income homeowners who hopefully are receiving the support that's necessary to help them make those payments anyway. I would also say I'm continuing to explore this conversation with lots of people, so I'd love to, if that's going to be a conversation that goes forward around how do you increase revenue to pay for your climate plan. I've been reaching out to tax experts across the country. I'm on the steering committee for the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, to ask them, how can the municipality do this given how hamstrung they are by their jurisdiction and the municipal charter. So they've offered me a few different options that I just want to read more about before I said them on the public record.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much for all of your work. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Deputy. Up next is the Vice Chair Morris. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Emma, for a fantastic presentation. You've touched on a lot of the questions I had, but I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about this mainstreaming, and if you had any more you could add on how we could better mainstream here at HRM. And also the communications, do you see some practical opportunities and times when we should be communicating? I mean, should we be communicating all the way through the budget process? Should we have an annual event where we update the public on our progress? Do you see certain opportunities that would be ideal to start having regular communications with the public? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Mainstreaming, I would just encourage you to look at the Halifax plan. There were specific actions within it for how to mainstream climate throughout Halifax governance, because one, I don't have it in front of me. Two, I'm still trying to familiarize myself with how Halifax works. But even it's hard to even find a reference to the climate plan or your incredible climate team on your website. I think that that they need more power and should be. I am not sure how closely linked they are to the CAO and the key decision makers, but I think that decisions around climate should have that level of power in the municipality, and every, is it business unit? Is that what you call them? Every business unit should have a climate lens for the decisions that they make and someone there discussing their greenhouse gas implications. But again, I would just refer to the experts who are the people who wrote your plan. And you asked about the communications piece. Every day. It would be amazing for us to hear some fun, encouraging communication regularly. Like, I'm imagining at bus terminals on the buses. I'm imagining all the adorable and annoying COVID skits I saw from the Nova Scotia government, or with, like, what was it? Someone showed up with a COVID head to their holiday dinner last Christmas in the tiny little Twitter ad I got. I do think all that plus everything else that you mentioned, Councillor Morse, during the budget period, I think regular updates are pretty helpful. And I think the thing that matters for me is, like, what are the greenhouse gas emission reductions that you're achieving? So I would love to hear that more regularly communicated. What is it that you're doing, and how far is it going to take you? If we're working on the R3, which is like one of the most exciting retrofit teams in Canada, what is the end goal for where that's supposed to take us in terms of greenhouse gas reductions by 2030? And then how far has it gotten us? I think that kind of communication would be really encouraging for people.
Thank you. Can I follow up with maybe what we need is a digital ticker that counts down in terms of our reductions every hour or something.
Cool.
I'm asking about this because I do a weekly Facebook post, and some posts are more successful than others. And I do find when I talk about the climate, people don't share, and it doesn't go very far. So it's probably my approach, but it's trying to find a line between being positive and being, scaring people, I guess, is part of it. But it's also finding those examples of that are positive, that people can be inspired by and understand, and all that sort of thing. So I think there are a lot of very challenging things about communicating something that is such a huge scale that makes people feel small and anxious. So I think some of your examples are really helpful. So thank you for that.
Thanks. I would say you're working against two very prominent narratives that have been funded by the fossil fuel industry, right? One is that this isn't urgent and that we have time, and the other is that we've run out of time. So on one end, you've got the people who say, well, we've got till 2050. On the other end, you have the people who say, well, there's no point in trying anyway. We're just going to have to rely on shooting water into the sky and hope it reflects back the heat from the sun. We have time. And I think the thing that I'm trying to say, and that the Climate Emergency Unit is trying to say, is the people that are responsible now for breaking through this cloud of misinformation they're you. And it's hard for you as a sole person to get the right message out there, but hopefully with the proper communications team, and happy to work with you always on it too. Man, I don't get lots of likes on my really buzzkill tweets, so I feel you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Next, Kathy Daigle-Gammon. Councillor, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for the presentation. And, on the balance of the public participation speaker, actually this flowed really well for me, to be honest, which was great. So I do appreciate it. About your presentation, I really enjoyed how it was framed, into the first 4 markers, and then what was the switch that means the next 2 markers and what they mean to us. So I really enjoyed that. I guess I'm just wondering a little bit about your thoughts, and building on that communication thing, that really hit me in your presentation, Emma, to be honest. And I was thinking about, what's targeted messaging, themed messaging, multi-generational. We have a lot of youth that they have some anxiety and fear now that has been built in around climate action and the lack of action on climate change. So, and then the whole thing about what is plain language in messaging and how we bring that into our communication plans, because I think, the same as with Councillor Moore, sometimes I think of when I send something out about climate change, it just falls. The one thing that does get attention recently was the thought that we would be looking at a 3% increase in order to address climate change. And with the gentleman before on the speaking, it's making sure that whatever investment we make, it gives us the return that we need, and then that the communication path validates that it's done that. So staying on top of that flow of information, I think, is a big challenge for us all. Like, there's the science part of it, but then there's also the whole messaging part. So, yeah, I think that the markers are really, really helpful in how we look at those things. So I guess maybe just a little bit more of your thoughts around what will make a communication plan so that people will not get so excited about where's the 3%, who pays it, because it does. I absolutely loved when you said you were going to talk to some tax people about whether or not it goes with an income bracket, because we don't want to be able to, what we don't want to do is make life even more difficult for those people who want to be able to address climate change, but they can't do it. So yeah, just a little bit of information around what you think around the messaging and how we do a dynamic communication path on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Just thinking about this communications piece. Again, I'm talking to experts on it. I've actually asked someone to come talk to me about communicating about the Halifax climate plan. And I think I need to get you all Seth's book. Chapter 3 was about communications, which I found the most compelling, and Seth will tell you they all get better after that, so you have to keep going. But so, sorry, I'm not sure I'm really clear on what your question is, but I think what I would say is, I think I've heard this statistic that like 4 out of 5 Haligonians don't know that we have a climate plan. Is that correct? I'm not sure if that, maybe it's a little bit less, maybe it's a bit more, but it's really hard for people to be excited about anything that's asking them to pay more if they don't even know that there's a plan for how to use it. But like I said, I don't want to just focus on the climate tax today, because I think that there's a lot of really important stuff in this plan that isn't that.
Yep.
And I think that that's the stuff that needs to be communicated, which is really what it comes down to. There are some really important conversations to be had, or like stories to tell around the retrofit plan, around your plan for EVs, about your plan for public transit, and your plan for integrated mobility plan. Like, these are all going to improve people's lives. And I think too, when I think back to resistance, so maybe you've heard about the Green New Deal, which is an American ideal, and we had a smaller Canadian version. Well, the New Deal. The Green New Deal has not been implemented yet, I should be clear. But when that was first introduced to help quell the fear and the anxiety that people were feeling about what it might mean for them, the first people to benefit from the plan and the spending were the people who were going to be most impacted by it. So if you're going to increase taxes or revenue, or like revenue collection, where is that money first going to be spent?
Right.
And I would say, it's helpful, and I do think that the Halifax team has done a great job of focusing on the most vulnerable, but clearly articulating that is definitely helpful.
Mr. Chair, may I have one more?
For my Cape Breton sister, by all means, I'll give you a long leash.
Thank you. Emma, as I listened to your answers, something just resonated for a minute, and that is a good many of the initiatives are within service boundaries, like transit and where things are. How do we get this to speak to the rural parts of our communities? Because if you're not within a service boundary, how do we make it more meaningful and attach it a little bit more in terms of rural communities?
Yeah, I would be curious to know about the response to the Halifax team for that, but my very first inclination is retrofits are everywhere. Wherever you live, you're going to benefit from getting a retrofit, and that's probably the most expensive part of the plan. And we have some of the highest energy poverty here in Nova Scotia, especially in our rural communities in the country. And that means that people are choosing between heating their homes and lighting their homes and buying food, right? That's what energy poverty is. And it's because we rely so much on oil and we live in super energy inefficient homes.
Yeah.
So
Good
that
point.
falls outside of boundaries. And also adaptation. Climate is changing much faster. The climate is warming much faster than scientists anticipated. It's pretty wild that it was 18 degrees here on Saturday. And last night there was breaking news that the Arctic glacier is set to, a key glacier in the Arctic is set to melt within the next 3 to 5 years, which would be catastrophic because we're not acting quickly enough. And so we need to help the people all across Nova Scotia adapt. And so it's not just about reductions, but about adaptation as well. And that means protecting our infrastructure that allows people to have clean drinking water, allows people to get around. You know, we had I'm seeing the reflection in the corner of my eye, Nancy, who I've actually learned most about adaptation from. But I think, you know, it was pretty amazing this year to see Guysborough wash out, and Victoria County had to declare a state of emergency after some really intense rainfall.
Yep.
So we need to be prepared. So I know a lot of the plan and the spending is going to be put towards protecting those people.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no one else on the board, if colleagues don't mind, I have a few questions from here. Ms. Horton, thank you very much for the presentation. You know, it's interesting, when it comes to climate change in the municipality, we've hit 2 milestones, I believe. First of all, declaring a climate change emergency, and the second milestone was coming out with our Halifax, our action plan. We're now coming to our third milestone, as you say, step up, we have to pay for it now. And you know, the timing is bang on for this because we have started our budget processing. You know, I think you also sense a theme here today. Communication kept coming up. And I realize your organization is to push all orders of government, but there's communication with government, our citizens, the business community, and this council, because this council, the 17 of us, there's definitely different opinions on climate change, on should we increase taxes, and should any of that go towards our action plan. And there's a range of folks when it comes to discussion about, you know, paying for a climate change plan. You know, the range is from those that will deny climate change altogether to the other end of that spectrum is gentlemen like Mr. Gaudette, who's willing to pay more as long as you provide him the insight to what we're doing and how we're going to do it and report on it. And then there's a whole bunch of people in between. And it's those people in between that we have the opportunity to communicate, and we need to communicate. You know, as soon as the word got out, there was a possible increase in tax by 5.9%, and 3% was going to go to our action plan. Well, every one of us received opinions on that, and a mixed opinions. For those that, like Mr. Gaudette said, I'll pay more. Congratulations. But a lot saying, no, don't you dare, don't understand it. What are you spending it on? And, you know, does an organization like yours not only communicate to influence government, does it also have an opportunity to go out and help to communicate to all those groups that I mentioned that are in the middle? Because that's where I feel we need to help with. I mean, we've got a great team here focused on it, leading the way, but they're limited on resources, and where do we spend those resources? And I don't think we do a very good job of explaining that to our citizens, and that's where I personally think we need to help, and if it's organizations like yours or others to assist. So just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Thank you. We do a little bit of education and communication to citizens. We mostly try to communicate to the people who are already on side and help to move them from worry and anxiety around climate to action. So that means we often host workshops explaining how different aspects of democracy work, key political opportunities. I would be happy to talk to other stakeholders for sure, and I am working with several other Nova Scotian environmental and social activist groups to reach out to people who would probably be on side with a little bit more education. I'm always going to push back and say that it is the responsibility of our elected officials to lead us right now. You need to tell the truth, and you need to tell people, and you like, even if we're getting pushback on certain climate actions, it's for the necessity of our community. It's for the necessity of the survival of future generations. It's pretty amazing to me that I'm 31 years old now, and the carbon budget to stay below 1.5 degrees ends in 2030, which is about the time where it might become a little bit more dangerous for me to have children. And I'm trying to think about having kids, right? And a lot of my friends are, and we are having this, we're not grappling with the impact that a child will have on the environment, because hopefully our governments will take action and their impact will be quite low. We're grappling with the world that they're going to be born into. So yes, we are dealing with other stakeholders, but really, people don't look to me and say, oh, Emma Norton is like a leader who can convince me. They look to our elected officials and our governments to convince them. And I know, so I would just say that, and I'm really happy to consult and work with you to develop what that messaging could look like. Because I think my resources are very, very stretched. There's 6 of us on a team that represent the entire country, and I am responsible for the file of 4 different provinces. So I have to really be careful about where I put my energy. But hopefully we'll get more team members soon. I would say too, you mentioned that something, I just want to draw the parallel between this crisis and the war again. So, you declared the climate emergency in January 2019, and then you introduced Halifax, and here we are needing to step up. And it reminds me of the story that Seth tells in his book around the first part of the war, where there was what historians call the phony war, where Canada had declared a war, but they weren't looking to spend. They didn't want to send people overseas. And it took a lot to convince Canadian citizens to get on board. It was the defeat in France, I believe, that really pushed us over the edge. And I'm wondering now if it's, I'm feeling a sense of urgency more and more when we see what happened in BC, when we see what happened here. That what is that moment, what is that catalyst moment going to be for us to step up, like you said? And I'm so glad to hear you say that this is the moment where we're going to step up. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you. And I see the Deputy Mayor wants to chime in again. But before we go there, I agree it's elected officials and our leadership that's key to this. But to get us to this next milestone, which is actually stepping up with some money to pay for it and get it going, I think it needs all hands on deck, all organizations. And we need, I know the term is overused during the pandemic, we're in this together, but we truly are in this together, especially to get to that first stage. So thank you for that, Emma. Yeah. Deputy Mayor?
Thank you. I'll just be very quick. So thanks for honing us in on Seth's book, Seth Klein, A Good War, Mobilizing Canada for Climate Emergency. I just bought it online, and I'll share it with you and put it into our council support office.
Did you buy 16 copies of that?
So I'll put it into the council support office library that we're building upstairs. And to your point about communications, with everything that we do when it comes to social transformation, it is a sense of urgency and emergency that mobilizes society to make that change, to do that kind of mental mind shift of, okay, I didn't care about this yesterday, but holy cow, I care about this today. So I'm looking forward to continuing to work with you and your team and learning more about what it is that you do and how we can work together. Thanks, Emma.
Well, it just keeps going on and on. Yeah. Vice Chair, you have the floor.
Thank you. I'll keep it short. The team that you just mentioned, are they working with the Canadian Federation of Municipalities? It seems to me there's kind of a weakness in Canada that in other cities in Europe, for example, where they seem to be making more progress on the climate, it's because the municipalities have more power, they have more independence. And so I think in Canada, we're going to have to work within the structures that we have. And I'm wondering how involved the Canadian Federation of Municipalities is, especially ahead of the federal budget. I mean, we really need partnerships with the national government, I think, to make some headway.
Is the Canadian Federation of Municipalities also known as the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, FCM?
Sorry, yeah.
Acronyms.
Misnamed it
Yeah,
myself.
it's okay. Same thing. We're not working with them. We're working a little bit with the Climate Caucus, who I believe does some work with them. But I made a note of it to reach out to them. I have worked directly with them on their PCP program. I was their regional advisor, the Partners for Climate Protection. And I felt that program was not in emergency mode, and I told them so. Hopefully FCM can come along, and I know they really would like to be. So I guess that's just to say I'm familiar with them. I know some of them. I know they mean well, but they also need to be worked with to move us all along, and I'll work on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Norton, thank you very much for taking the time and sharing your 6 markers with us. I really think that's a really good guideline for us to have further discussion, so we truly appreciate it. And you're welcome to stay for the next presentation, and we encourage you to do so. All right, colleagues, let's move on, and we're now moving to 12.1.1, Halifax Acting on Climate Together, the 2021 annual report. I did forget to mention earlier on when we started the meeting that Councillor Cleary did send his regrets. So he may be actually listening online, but I forgot that. So we ask staff to come forward. Shannon, good to see you. Welcome as always. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Shannon Miedema, Manager of Environment and Climate Change. Really happy to be here today. I'm just setting up the presentation. And hopefully you get it on your screen here. Perfect. So I'm just going to give a brief presentation to provide a little bit of foundation for the very large report that you've had for only a few days. For our first annual progress report on the climate plan. We did provide an interim report in January, but this is after a full year. So before I begin, I just would like to introduce a couple new team members that we have that are here today. On my team, we have Nancy Anningson, who is our new climate change adaptation specialist. You can wave. We have Chris Bernard, who is a clean energy specialist and an engineer. And we have Emma Waddy, who had been filling in for Cameron Dekoff and is now permanently with the city as our new program coordinator for the new water quality monitoring program we're going to be launching in the spring. So they are here to get a taste for Environment Committee. So this is now a familiar picture burned into all of your brains, I'm sure, but this is the scientific, science-based requirement. This is what we need to do in Halifax specifically if we want to achieve a net zero by 2050 objective, and if we want to stay within the carbon budget that everyone's been talking about today. I also mentioned that it's really tough some tough acts to follow. Thanks very much to Seo and Emma for their work today. That red line is the kind of anticipated blowing of the carbon budget if we don't shift from a business as usual scenario and actually follow the steep decline of emissions reductions that we need. We would blow it by about 2027 or 2028. And the deep energy retrofits in existing buildings that a lot of people were speaking about today is all in the red on the wedge model. Green is solar, blue is large-scale renewables, yellow is net zero new building construction, mauve is electrifying our transportation systems, and then the rest are water, wastewater, and industrial processes. And you can see if we didn't do anything, we would be following along the top of that line, and we'd probably get about a 33% reduction over time, and that's from things that were already kind of in the works and expected to happen, like Muskrat Falls coming online, like the cleaner fuel standards federally, et cetera. Just a reminder of the motion that was passed when the plan was put forward to council in June of 2020, in the very early days of the pandemic. It was to authorize the direction of the plan, to establish a target for net zero municipal operations by 2030, to prioritize work in 7 critical core areas, recognizing that there is a call and a need to do all 46 actions, but limitations in terms of capacity at the onset. Also to direct the CAO to return to council with a resource plan for consideration in the budget process, and to provide annual progress reports, and that's what we're doing today. We've spoken about this before, but green municipal operations, this is a pretty exciting one. This is showing leadership. This is doing our part with the assets that we own and control and maintain. Also requiring us to really take the actions to heart across the municipality and in each department, mainstream our thinking and prioritizations, but also to, retrofit our own corporate buildings out to 2030, and the on-site energy manager is in the final stages of a deep energy roadmap that we're really excited about, really showing step-by-step how we're going to get from A to B. Also includes net zero new building construction, electrifying our fleet, increasing our waste diversion, though it's very great already, generating renewable energy, and purchasing local zero carbon electricity. This is where we are in terms of the hard numbers for greenhouse gas emissions within the municipality over time. I was hired actually 12 years ago yesterday to the city as the first person to internally do a greenhouse gas inventory, and I did that 2008 column right there, which I'm very happy to say is higher than the one we have in 2020. We've gone down about 28% since then. Recognizing that some of the reason for the more steep dip between 2019 and 2020 is COVID related. And this, that was corporate. And this is community-wide emissions. So this is us plus everybody else within our boundaries, 2016 out to 2020. And we've gone down 24%. So we have had a lot of things to be proud about and work done to celebrate since the onset of this plan, and even before the onset of this plan, I should say. We've had climate plans as a city for many, many years. This was a complete redo to align with the science, and also to add in the very important piece of climate adaptation and not just mitigation. I don't need to go through all of this. I know we are already more than halfway through the meeting, but we've secured substantial funding across a lot of different areas to progress some of our climate actions. So the Net Zero Mill Cove ferry design, the 60 electric buses, and the electrification of the expansion at the Ragged Lake Transit Facility. We secured a $175,000 grant to analyze Solar City and provide some support as we develop our retrofit program, and that's the work that the R3 team is doing that Emma was referring to. And we've applied for $1 million of matching funds to really get moving on installing electric vehicle charging infrastructure across the city to support public uptake of electric vehicles. Approvals by Regional Council have been numerous with our recently adopted electric vehicle strategy for the city, the deep energy retrofit pilot using the Solar City model to test out what it's going to take to get homeowners and building owners to say yes to deep energy retrofits, the administrative orders to require ourselves to build to net zero or net zero ready for all new construction that we oversee as a municipal government, have all been approved recently. And we did sign on to the city's race to zero in the lead up to COP26. In terms of retrofits and renewable energy, we did submit an expression of interest to the Green Choice Program provincially to purchase clean energy. We did calculations to show what it would mean to purchase up to 100% of our electricity requirements as a municipal government. We're waiting for that legislation to finalize. We have loaned almost $18 million through the Solar City program since its onset. We have enabled the Dartmouth North Community Center project to become a deep energy retrofit project and put a very large solar installation there. And I mentioned the deep energy roadmap corporately for our buildings is under development. The corporate climate account that we have, which is now in its second year, funded the full amount for the electric bikes for parking services. It purchased an electric ice resurfacer for community rinks, or maybe the Delta, to make it electric. They had just enough for a regular Zamboni and wanted to go electric, so we were happy to do that. And several other large solar installations on corporate buildings and community centers. And a third of the regional center all ages and abilities bike network is now complete, which is really fantastic. We are compliant and have received all of the badges for the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy, which is a program that we've been part of for some years now. We also received an A in our city's disclosure project for our reporting. That's the formal reporting of emissions and climate planning work for municipal governments that we report to on an annual basis. In terms of adaptation, we have purchased a refrigerated truck to support vulnerable communities during emergencies. Basically, during extended power outages, what we heard in community was the real pressures and the real pressures faced by people who were losing their food in their freezers during like multi-day power outages. And so in partnership with emergency management and the Just Food team, we worked to purchase a refrigerated truck that will be used by the mobile food market when it's a non-emergency situation, but can be mobilized by the emergency management team when there is a need in any particular community within HRM. So that's a real exciting development. We paid for the rain garden component of the Prince Albert Road project and helped to contribute funds to the number of trees that were required to be planted under the Urban Forest Master Plan this year. We just today are submitting an application. A really exciting fund federally is the Natural Infrastructure Fund, which is a first of its kind, I think, in Canada. So it's infrastructure money, but for natural infrastructure. And there's quite strict requirements on what you can and can't use it for. And we've put a project forward contemplating some work on Shore Road, which is in Eastern Passage, a $5 million project where we would contribute $2 million of that over 2 years. And you know, as a municipality, really happy that we've acquired some land in addition to providing funds for the Blue Mountain Birch Cove Lakes land acquisition. Those are all really important adaptation pieces. And finally, last set of successes, you know, with the center plan passing, we are extending the vertical coastal setback requirements to include commercial and industrial uses, which is really important because before it was just residential, and we needed to really look more broadly than that in terms of our coastal protections that we can require. We have issued a contract to localize the new global climate predictions that were just released by the IPCC in August. It's the assessment report number 6. We've been waiting for that. It was delayed a little bit. They come out, I think, about every 7 years. And so really great timing because we have our new digital elevation model and LiDAR, and now we have the new global predictions that have been just updated freshly, and we are localizing those risks so that we can update all of our climate hazard maps and look at what it means to our critical infrastructure and to our communities, and then prioritize work going forward. Emergency backup generators were installed at 4 community locations so that those could be emergency comfort centers during extreme weather events. And we completed a natural asset inventory in partnership with the Municipal Natural Assets Initiative. So while I am very proud of all of this work that from the team, from the organization, and from our stakeholders, unfortunately, it isn't meeting the scale and the speed required to achieve the very ambitious and large targets that we have for 2030 and for 2050. As was mentioned, and what you see in the report is that we estimate we're about 20% on track and 14% adequately resourced. And this requires further resources, obviously, but also major systems change, mainstreaming our climate action, education and awareness. I'm going to throw communication in there based on our talk so far. That's something that's been top of mind for us as well, and collective action by all of our partners and the public. This shows the amount of time we have before we exceed that carbon budget in weeks from the day that Council passed a climate emergency in January of 2019. So you can see the date it was declared, the date that we approved the Halifax plan, where we are now in December, and it's quite an impactful visual for everyone that sees it, because time is not our friend. If we had all the time in the world, this would actually not be too hard, but we don't. We are getting close to halfway through the time from, and I mean, it seems like yesterday that Council passed the climate emergency. Time is flying by from my perspective. So this is the amount of time we have to really take advantage of what we have, all the opportunities that we have to work quickly and urgently to try and hit our targets and stay within our budget. So what do we need to succeed? Some of the things that we talk about are shared accountability of the actions themselves across our organization. Who's responsible for what? What are the roles? How do we really get moving on all of the actions that we're supposed to be doing all at the same time? How do we organize ourselves to do so? How do we mainstream climate thinking at every decision-making table that we're not necessarily a part of? Climate thinking really should be embedded in all layers, in all levels, and in all spaces. How do we include climate action in our budget and business planning processes? We've started to do that. We met with all business units through the summer months to talk about their role in the climate plan, where they saw leading or co-leading the different actions within the plan, what they needed in terms of support from the climate team, what they needed in terms of resources and funds to do the work that they were going to be responsible for over time. So we started having those conversations about staff and funding needed, both for the climate team but also for others within HRM. So as part of this report, we did try and put together a resource plan, as was asked for in the motion when the plan went forward in 2020, and it's something that just needs to be done. So we developed a 3-year resource plan, recognizing that things are changing really, really quickly in the climate space, weekly, if not daily. And this was done based on what we know of the work within the climate team and all of the actions and all the 7 priority areas, and then based on all the conversations we had with every department through the summer and fall. And it's the attachment in the report. I'm sure there'll be questions on it. But it basically shows a need for some more full-time employees over time, and the associated compensation for those employees, at a kind of high-level estimate. And then the operating and capital costs to really move on. And this is really focusing on the 7 core areas, so this isn't actually all of the 46 actions. This is a lot of them. A lot of the actions are captured within the 7 core areas, but this is not everything forever. This is not finite. This is our first kind of best detailed approach for 3 years, recognizing that we are taking an adaptive management approach and we're going to capitalize on all the opportunities that come up as we go forward. So we do need sustained funding. Upfront significant financial investment is needed to implement the plan. I've said at every single presentation, though, that it's really an investment. It's not just a spending. There is a return on investment for climate. There are estimates from the federal government that for every dollar you spend preparing for extreme weather and climate events, you will save 6 in future loss, in future impact costs. And the modeling that was done, the Pretty Rainbow Wedge, had a financial component to it as well, and it's very high level, and it's for the collective. It's not just for the municipal government, it's for everybody within HRM, but it estimates that we'll basically be up an additional $22 billion over the $22 billion that they estimate it's going to cost over 30 years collectively to do the climate plan, both the mitigation and the adaptation pieces. So sustained financing is important because one-off projects and piecemeal funding won't actually get us to the targets. We won't be mobilizing at scale. And we need to think about new financing mechanisms, and we need kind of sure and committed capital and operating year over year. The savings that are predicted in the model are largely from avoided energy costs because we're driving our need for energy down so substantially while electrifying, and then also savings on operations and maintenance costs. And this has actually been proven to HRM specifically in the work we've done in our building stock. So all the work that our on-site energy manager has done for the last 3 years saves us more than $1.5 million annually in energy spends and maintenance costs. And that's just going to keep growing as we mobilize and fill and do the deep energy roadmap that they're preparing. Also, we know the cost of carbon is going up over time, and so by spending less on carbon, we'll be saving on those more expensive carbon prices, and we can increase revenues with renewable energy generation as well. I already talked about the adaptation savings. And then just another note, which I've said before, but with COVID, there is this opportunity to really pivot in where we invest and how we invest and what we prioritize. And we're seeing, climate lenses required for almost every funding application now, and that's there for a reason. And it helps to build a strong case for a decision that is, both good for our community, but also for our climate ambition. And also, very importantly, acting on climate now and trying very hard to achieve the objectives in this plan provides a social opportunity. And this was spoken to much more eloquently by Emma than it will be by me. But we prepared the plan with a mind to equity and inclusion, and all of the work that we've done since it passed has been to prioritize that. So buying the refrigerated truck, focusing on Shore Road, putting the work into the Dartmouth North Community Center first. Those are things that we have been trying to do in our small team that really prioritizes our vulnerable first and foremost, because we know that climate impacts hit our vulnerable populations first and worst. And so we really are mindful of that, and that is guiding all of our decisions as we go forward. Building resiliency in our communities improves lives, improves daily lives. Reducing energy poverty was spoken to before. It's a huge issue in Atlantic Canada. And if we act now and we can kind of stave off some of the impacts that we're already seeing across Canada, we'll be helping our future generations, and we'll be putting them on a path to success the further ahead we get as we go along. So to conclude, we really do still need urgent and transformative action across all levels of government, all stakeholders, and the public. We're still kind of acting in a business as usual mode as compared to potentially a war emergency mode, right? And for very good reason. It's really hard for large systems like government systems, academic institutions, industrial processes, all these things. We are set up the way we are after many, many years of setting it up that way. And we have lots of checks and balances, and we have, lots of responsibilities to our citizens and to our stakeholders. And I'm not saying that I have all the answers at all, but we really need to try and shift into more urgent mode, I would say. We need to invest now, and there is a return on investment if we do so. Success requires action across the entire organization and others, like I said. There are financial tools that can help us, and we are exploring every opportunity within my shop, at least, such as the new Halifax Climate Investment, Innovation, and Impact Fund that we actually helped to set up, that is operating under the umbrella of Efficiency One. Such as the Canada Infrastructure Bank that is trying to get cities and other public sector institutions to look at their proposal for energy performance contracts, which would allow us to retrofit our buildings and pay them back through the savings, and they actually take a lot of the risk on now, so a lot of the issues with older energy performance contracts are gone. We can leverage private investment with public funds, and we can look at public and private partnerships. We can look at requests of the provincial government for green bonds and things like that through the Municipal Finance Corporation. There's no limit to the innovation and creativity we can put into the financing piece. It just is work that needs to be done. And if we act now, we're going to save money, we're going to prevent loss, we're going to prepare our communities better for climate impacts, and we're going to improve community well-being. And I will stop there. Thank you very much.
Shannon, thank you very much, as always. First up is Councillor Austin. Councillor Austin, would you put the motion on the floor also at the same time?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll put the motion on. I move that Environment and Sustainability Standing Committee accept this report and forward to Halifax Regional Council for information.
Second by Kathy Daigle-Gammon. Councillor, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will probably have an amendment to that motion, but I'll save that for after some questions. So thank you, Shannon, for this report. This is something I was dearly anticipating, having championed that at council back at the day, that we need to not just have a plan that goes on a shelf. We need a plan that actually has, okay, how are we going to do the thing, especially for something of this scale. So I'm very happy to have this, to actually have something that's more concrete as to what we need, and that's the piece that I'm just, as I'm looking at it, that I'm struggling with a little bit, and I think my struggle is probably not unique. It's probably the same questions that you on the staff side are struggling with. Like, okay, so we've identified some money that we need in these areas. We've identified some staff that we need. If council does these things in the budget cycle coming, what's the expected result on the other end? When you next come around to us in a year, do we expect that some of these will actually move from, not started or not on track? Will this actually materially move us forward on achieving what we need to do with the plan? Because it's that kind of tying that together in terms of the resources needed that I find not quite clear in here. Could you help me out with that? Is that?
Mr. Chair, through you to the councillor. So I think what I'm hearing is, can we be sure that if we make the investment that we will have a better report card next year?
Yes.
Right.
Sure. Let's go. Yeah. Let's start there.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, when I became manager of this team, it was me and one other person. And we have grown slowly but surely to about 8 right now and a couple more. And we're in a hiring mode, and that's thanks to the investments that have been made. So we got 3 new staff a year ago, 6 this year, and we're asking for 6 more plus another 2 in the 22-23 budget. And that is fast growth. That is really fast for municipal government team growth, but it's a good stepped growth to really mobilize our capacity, and every person that we have onboarded has significantly improved our ability to do the work. A lot of the work that we do isn't just on the actions. Our team does about half of the actions as kind of leaders of those actions, but we're really trying to support the whole organization in moving their actions forward, in applying for those funds and doing those climate lenses, in finding the delta to make their projects more climate aligned, and also really working with our stakeholders through our quarterly meetings of the stakeholder network. We had over 100 people on the call about a month ago, really trying to keep that momentum and buy-in alive across our stakeholders is really important. Do the training on collective impact, and then try and foster the projects, the kind of pipeline of projects that people are coming forward with, that they have energy and ability to do, trying to seed them and move them forward. So every person that we bring on has been instrumental and will help ultimately with the progression of the actions, as will the funds, right? The money. You need the money, but you need the people to move the money. As we know, right? It's really hard to spend a lot of capital in a short period of time because of all of our processes and others' processes that we don't have control over, right? So yes, I could confidently say that if we onboard all the people that we are hoping to and get some of the investments that we're looking for, that we will be progressing further and faster.
Okay, I'm going to throw 2 questions at you quick since I'm running out of time. The staff side, I mean, that's been a big worry of mine, because you can't do the stuff if you don't have the people. Would more staff, like you're asking for 8 this year, could you use more staff if council allocated that to in the budget? And then the other piece, I'm going to have to come back for that. We'll go with that one for now.
So you're saying more staff faster. I mean, it's a bit tricky, right? Like, you can only onboard. It depends on the structure. It depends on where the people are being placed. So, you know, I actually think that there might have been some learnings going through the summer months when we were meeting with the departments. I think that at the time, they weren't as sure of what they needed because they were just putting their minds to their piece of the climate plan. I think now that there's been more time, more things developing, that there are some that have reached out to say, oh, I probably should have asked for another resource or 2, or maybe in next year I can do that. Also, we know like more positions were created with the money that Jacques had asked for, and some of those are climate related, like for transit and things like that, and the corporate EV fleet person. So there are other positions being created, you know, kind of separately from this ask, and they've been accounted for, but they're not being asked for again. So I think, yes, probably more staff could be onboarded in a shorter period of time, but it would be really important to think about where they're going and how they're being supported.
Why don't you come back? Thanks, Councillor. Deputy, you have the floor.
Thank you. Wow, thank you so much. This is really exciting to be at this point. You know, 1 year in, lots of information to go through. You know, to Emma's point earlier about communication, you know, there's a phenomenal amount of really good information in here about what we're doing and why we're doing it and how we want to do it. But, you know, the average sort of person, or even a grade 12 student that wants to do a project on Halifax, you know, and I've spoken with university students who want to look deeper into Halifax, you know, and I've heard this many times from Councillor Daigle-Gammon talking about plain language. we need to work harder to make our reports more accessible. I'm not saying they need to be all jazzed up with bells and whistles, but they need to be digestible. And I know that's difficult, right? Because this is a council report, a committee report, and so it's difficult to do that. But I almost feel like we need, a summary page or something that kind of goes with this big meeting report. And I mean, this is really on the scale of reports. It's kind of small, 65 pages, right? But even so, it would be nice to just have sort of some key points, some bullet points of here's some really great stuff that you're going to find in this report, and kind of entice them to come in and read it. I want to talk about number 7 because, let me just find that core area number 7. There we go. Develop a financing strategy to operationalize a Halifax plan over 30 years. Oh my gosh, $400,000. Can we just do this? This is the meat and potatoes of getting it done. To Councillor Austin's point, we got to have people in order to move the money. I think that's what you said. So we can't move the money if we don't have the people. So we got the chicken and the egg. We can't really do this stuff without the money. And thinking about some really creative financial solutions. So I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about, who's doing these green bonds? Do we see this being picked up here across the country? Do we have, interest from FCM to maybe do some kind of, lunch and learns or in-depth sort of overview of how municipalities can create these new finance opportunities for ourselves? And obviously, to address something of this magnitude, we are going to have to be really creative. And I think maybe it was during our strategic financing, the priorities discussion, we were saying, how are we going to find the revenue? What are we going to do to find the money that we need to address this? Because, we can hit the lower hanging fruit and pat ourselves on the back and tell the community we're doing a great job. But if we're not going after the big issues, as you say, the ROI is high. So it's invest now and save later. And it's not just saving financially, it's socially. So I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about that. And, I realize I'm not an economist, I'm not an accountant, I don't have a background. I can do bookkeeping, I can do that. But just thinking about ways that we can maybe pick up on like a catastrophe bond. I'm sure those are happening in the States. I know I've heard of that before. So if you can speak to that, thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, thank you. Those are all great comments and questions. So to start with communication, one of the positions that was approved this year, of the 6 that we have, is for a climate engagement specialist, because that is a gap and a need for the city. And we had some people on contract for helping facilitate our stakeholder network in the development of the climate plan. So we had a lot of outreach. It was pre-COVID. We were meeting in person. We had a lot of development, or a lot of time and work went into really engaging broadly and hearing, getting input as we develop the plan. But we really need to start doing that as we now implement it. And we've kind of lost that resource because that was a contract resource. We had a few contracts through the Innovation Outpost in partnership with the Halifax Partnership, and so was able to continue with some capacity on that. We also had a kind of public affairs person, public marketing person help us in the plain language piece of the climate plan itself. So we really struggled at trying to get to like a grade 8 or grade 6 or whatever reading level for the climate plan, but we did try and get the jargon out and try and make it catchy and full. Like we tried to kind of use those guiding principles for the plan itself. Yeah, council reports are tricky because they have a certain style and format, and I think we push the envelope a little bit on ours on a regular basis. But our intention after this report has gone through is to actually look at how to message it with the public. You know, we heard that from the resident survey, only about 83% of the public don't even know that we have a climate plan. And, you know, we work with our corporate communications group, and they'll put tweets out and do different paid social media for some of our different pieces. But that's not getting at a large part of our municipality, unfortunately. Not everybody is following HFX Gov, even though they maybe should. So we recognize that, and we really would like to put a lot more emphasis on communication, because that's really the base for getting the education, the awareness, and the ultimate buy-in. So that's why we are really hoping to fill that position in the new year for the engagement lead as a first position, and probably would require more going forward in partnership with how we work with corporate communications. And we've actually asked to meet with them to develop a new communications plan now, because the other one was more focused on the development of the plan, not the implementation and the ongoing support. So that's coming up in the new year as well.
Okay, good.
And for financing, yeah, really good question. So that core area, I would say, hasn't largely progressed yet. And one of the positions that we're asking for next year is actually focused on sustainable finance, a sustainable finance specialist, because we think some expertise in-house would be really valuable. We've done finance, and our team have both done, all the webinars that we can, and different small trainings around some of the options. There are some cities that have different abilities than we do for things like green bonds. So we have to borrow through the Municipal Finance Corporation. They don't currently have green bonds. That's controlled by the province. So we have had some early conversations about things like that. But Ottawa funded its LRT through a green bond, right? And finance is not my expertise, so I want to hire some really smart people to look at that in partnership with our finance team, and they're very supportive of this as well. So that would be great going forward.
Good.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Deputy. Vice Chair, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Fantastic work. Small, very dynamic team, and inventing things as you're going. So I think it's remarkable what you've been able to do in a short time. A couple quick questions and then a longer one. What is the total ask of your team for next year? Do you see any symbolic, highly visual projects that we might undertake? Maybe solar panels on City Hall, something that shows that we're taking leadership as a municipality. And the retrofits, to me, seem to be so important for equity and for achieving our goals over the long term. And I noticed when I was speaking with staff that the plan for retrofits is a pilot. It looks great, but we're hiring one person for around $100,000 to do a 50-home pilot. And I just wonder, since the retrofitting and achieving building efficiencies is so important overall, if there's any way to go from one person and $100,000 and 50 homes to something a little bit bigger. It's a critical piece, and I know it's a pilot, but it just seems like maybe we could invest a little bit more to get greater results early on. So thank you.
Mr. Chair, through you to the councillor, thank you for that. The financial ask for the full climate plan for next year, not the 3-year ask you're asking for? Okay, yeah. So in the capital ask is about 9 million for next year, I believe, with the totals of the 3 strategic initiative pieces, plus the $2 million kind of bundled account, which is what we enabled all of the kind of early successes that I spoke about with. It's kind of a bundled account that just talks about the categories of work that we can do. So it's that $2 million plus the work for the EV strategy, for critical infrastructure, and for deep energy retrofits of corporate buildings. And then I think we put in, into the proposed wage model, the 8 positions, so 6 for our team and 2 for others, or however that shakes out. And then in operating, I think it was about another, so that translated to about another $1.5 million for next year.
So my math is poor, so what's the total for next year at capital and operating and staff? It sounded like about 20 million, is that right? Or?
No, it wouldn't be 20 million for next year. It would be about 9 plus the operating.
Okay.
Mr. Duncan has joined the team. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Probably the easiest way to look at this is just if you look on page 19.
Sorry, I don't have it with me.
The operating costs are summarized of the staff report. And the incremental cost of the operating budget for next year is shown as 2.375 million, and the capital costs are shown as 9.96 million.
Okay,
And that's for 2022-23.
that's the total,
Yes.
11 to $12 million.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor, you're done?
No, and I wanted to just ask a little bit about if there was a highly visible project we might do, and if you could comment on the accelerating the retrofits.
Through Mr. Chair to the councillor, I think for symbolic projects, I think the Dartmouth North Community Centre is probably a symbolic project. I think when we finally get an electric bus, and I can't say when that's going to be, but that would be great.
Yeah.
And I think also, this shore, should we get the funding for Shore Road and actually try out a natural infrastructure solution with like marshes and oyster beds and all kinds of things that we've been learning about. I think that would be really exciting for the local community, but also the community at large. The proposal includes public spaces, LID benches, trails as part of the solution. So I think that that would be really symbolic as well.
Yep.
And then you talked about equity around the retro program and the money being asked for that. So we have some staff already working on the retrofit pilot, and we have the R3 team, which is a cross organization, not just HRM staff, but we've got other great brains from other places in HRM helping us with that, like Emma Norton, like Efficiency Nova Scotia, like Laura Ryan, formerly from the CAGBC, and lots of others. And then we have energy engineers in-house and climate specialists that are working on this. So we're using the Solar City model for the pilot because we're trying to act quickly, right? So it was the quickest way to have some funds to test out the sticky pieces. And so we're trying to test out that sticky piece of what does it take to get a homeowner to say yes. And we really think, based on all the research and all the work that the R3 team has done for the last year, that it's really about, I hate the word hand-holding, but AI and having to navigate different websites and different rebates yourself as a homeowner is really overwhelming. We've heard it from all walks that it's too much for anybody. Either they're too busy, they just want to, throw money at the problem or ask for help. They just want a person to help them navigate. So that's the thing we're testing, and we'd actually be issuing a contract for like this kind of navigator solution to test it out. So that's what the pilot is, and it's for up to 50 homes, and the money that we would be loaning out is through that Solar City mechanism. So whether it ends up being 50 homes to get us to an answer or 10, we don't know yet, but that's what that's about.
Okay.
And at the same time, we got funding to actually analyze the Solar City program from an equity lens and give us guidance on how to create an equitable retrofit program, and also to look at financing options, because right now we are the loaners of all of the money, all of the 18 million on the Solar City program. We don't have the money to do that at scale for retrofits, and arguably shouldn't be the bank on this. And so there's starting to be an appetite from third-party finance institutions to do this. So we've been working closely with our finance group on that, and we just issued an RFP actually this week to get some input on the financing side.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Kathy Daigle-Gammon. Councillor, you have the floor.
Oh, thank you very much.
He's come back for a second time, so you have the priority over him.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this presentation. I'll have to say, I haven't been able to do a deep dive into this 65-page report, so my apologies first. Been 2 12-hour days before this. But one of the things that I was kind of interested in is, in some previous reports, we're talking about how we integrate in other business units climate action leads within the business units, and I'm wondering where that fits within this. Do those leads become complementary to this plan and connect to each of the 7 themes, the 7 cores?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, are you speaking about existing leads in business units?
Yep.
Okay, I'm unfamiliar with there being climate leads in business units right now. When we went and met with all of the business units, we talked about that. You know, what resources do you need from our team? Do you want to embed them strictly in your team? Do you want maybe us to loan you a person for a certain amount of time? In Vancouver, that's what they've done, and it's been really successful.
So maybe my brain just did the jump.
Maybe you just jump from, what
Right.
Vancouver's doing to what we should do. Yeah, so Vancouver actually does it where they'll kind of loan out a person on a 18-month or 2-year term, depending on what the need is to any given department, say on electrifying corporate fleet.
Right.
And then at the end of that time, they get to claw them back, or that business unit decides that that's a resource they need to continue on with and decides to put it into their budget and to kind of have that person in their ranks, or they come back and then they get assigned to a different project. And that's been going on for years and has been really successful in Vancouver. So we've looked at that as an option and have proposed that to the business units in case that is something. So I think every business unit will have to make decisions that are right for them on whether they just need to have new staff within their
Right.
department, or just use us when they need to, or just do some training of existing staff. Like, it all depends on the work and the timeline and what they're actually putting into their business plan and their budget asks.
Okay. The next question I would have would be around the sourcing of other funds. And so right now, there isn't a dedicated position, and so in that dedicated position, would it also then look at things like social impact bonds, other levels of government, foundations? Is there any part of that that would have, an impact to lessen these costs in year 1 to 3?
Mr. Chair, through you to the councillor. Really, if we were to hire an innovative finance specialist, a sustainable finance, whatever we would call it, we would need help even in creating the job description to make
Right.
it appropriate. But really, there'd be no limit to the ideas and what would make sense for HRM. One thing I'll note is, what did you say about lessening the impact in the first 3 years?
Right. Financial impact.
Yeah, so when, all I know about the proposed tax is that they did not include any funding that we would get from other levels of government, because that's not already contracted over time.
Right.
Looking at the 10 years. And also they didn't account for any savings, any return on the investment. So it was just looking at pure costs. So there are returns on investment for a lot of the work. Some of them are very quick. In some of our buildings, they're in less than 6 months payback when we do lighting retrofits or HVAC work. And then some of them are longer.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Second time around, Councillor Austin. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Second time around is always challenging. 3 minutes. Just quickly, I wanted to hit on the whole home retrofit solar aspect of it, because, of course, one of our biggest challenges at the municipal level is, our powers are constrained. And, the Halifax plan isn't just a municipal plan. Like, greening our own operations, in some ways, it comes at a cost. There are the savings in the end, but that's the low-hanging fruit, right? That's something we directly control. Trying to drive change out into the wider community, that's a much kind of bigger challenge. And I think, in things that we can do quickly, to go to CEO's point earlier about efficiency, effectiveness, I feel like just in the gut that the home retrofit and solar are ones that tick those boxes, because they are ones we already have the legislative powers to do, right? And I like when Kevin was here talking about Solar City. Solar City's great because it's a good example. Like, we've already done this, and we know what some of the pitfalls are. One of the pitfalls in Solar City is that over time it has become less and less effective as an attraction, and that's in part because the financial terms to it are not. You can get better money out of the banks oftentimes. There are other reasons to go with it, but I think we should take those lessons into home retrofit. And Emma had talked about we can't incentivize ourselves out of this crisis, and she's right. However, the sticks need to come from the province primarily. One of the only tools we have right now is incentivizing when it comes to the home retrofit. And the piece about having a navigator I think is key, because we're all busy people. And if you have someone who's, look, I'm not costing you anything, I will do this program for you, I will go arrange this stuff, I will make this a turnkey thing for you, and you know what, your terms will be with the city, and they're generous, and you get it back over time. I mean, we need to make it an offer that's too good to refuse, whether that's through money from outside or whether that's from us. I really feel like on the community side, that's our best bet right now. Staff accountability, as I see 30 seconds here. Staff accountability piece, I have a question and then I will have a motion to make. My question is, in the report, it talks about needing to mainstream it across the organization, and how we've started to have conversations about who's responsible for what. But I didn't see that in the report. Maybe I've missed it in fine print somewhere. I would like to see the 47 actions linked. Okay, this is with this business unit. This is with this business unit. And that done publicly. Because what I want to do is during budget discussions, and when we have all these folks come before us, I want to be able to ask them, what are you doing about X? This is part of your responsibility under Halifax. Because I think as council, we have a role. What we ask about is, I mean, there is that priority setting that happens around the council table when council's interested in something. So I would like to be equipped to do that. And so I'm wondering, my question for Shannon would be, can we get an actual just briefing note spreadsheet that identifies 47 actions and the business units attached? I mean, some of them are self-explanatory, but I think it would be helpful to have that in print publicly.
Mr. Chair, through you to the councillor, we do have that. I would say that would be an ask of the CAO whether or not it is disclosed, but that is the work that we did when we went to the senior leadership team to talk about climate implementation, and then we went to the departments. And so we actually have it structured by action or by business unit, and then all the actions that they would be leading or co-leading. So right now we actually have a model where we're suggesting that a lot of the actions are co-led just because of the nature of the actions. And then there's a bunch of supporting departments as well, because a lot of the work requires almost every department sometimes too, depending on what the action is. Because those actions are, while discrete, still multi-year and very complex, and there's lots of different projects and policies and programs that happen within them. So that's how we've structured it, and I'm not sure that is like a completely accepted and finalized approach. That's just kind of a first approach that we presented as an option. So I would say that would be a discussion for the CAO.
I will put that into a motion then, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Councillor.
So I will move,
It's on your screens, colleague. If you
Thanks. So I move that I would move to amend the main motion to attach the Environment and Sustainability Standing Committee further recommends that Regional Council schedule a committee of the whole to review the Halifax Annual Progress Report and request a briefing note outlining the business unit responsibilities for each Halifax action.
Second by the deputy.
Thank you on that. I think I've already kind of laid the case out. I think we really need to attach this at the senior leadership director level publicly and for council. These are the business unit responsibilities. This is who's supposed to be doing what. And then we can go from there in terms of an accountability piece. So I think that's important to have, and it would be a good discussion for our committee of the whole to have that, especially if the work is basically in draft form already, if we can get that for that. So thank you, colleagues. That's it for me on the amendment.
So on the amendment, Deputy, are you on the original motion?
Sure. Oh, yes.
Deputy, we look forward to hearing from you on the amendment.
Yes, on the amendment.
Oh, nice.
Oh, you had to tell her that now, didn't you?
So thank you so much, Councillor Austin. You know, I was trying to think in my head, what does this actually look like on the grid? You know, who's doing what? What's the timeline? What's the project plan? And all the players for each of these things, and how are we actually going to get it done? And it's one thing to have it, you know, in a report or on paper, but I like to see that grid and the interconnectivity of it all. And it's great to hear that some of these actions are actually being co-planned or, co-led, because then you've got kind of that broader team approach, you know, not just one business unit. And I think we're all kind of trying to get everything done all at once and work as hard as we can on this, but at the same time, we need to be able to be transparent and communicating to the public in a way that shows, comprehensively, here's how we're making this work, here's how we're getting this work done. And I think by going to committee of the whole gives us the opportunity not only to dive deep into some of these items, prioritize maybe, and pull up some of the pieces to make sure that they're adequately resourced. Because the other question I have is around the power, and I think Emma raised it earlier, about the sort of the administrative power that the team has, that your team has, Shannon, to be able to, go into a business unit and say, okay, hey guys, we just need to redirect, we need to pull back on this, we need to focus on this, potentially because there's a funding source or there's a great opportunity in front of us to partner, and just thinking about ways that we can be flexible, but also address in an efficient manner, as was brought up earlier. Let's talk about efficiency, right, in getting the job done, so that we can see that beautiful bar continuing to come down. So I'm very happy to support this. Thank you.
Anybody else on the amendment? See no others on the amendment. We have a call for the question. The question has been called for. All those in favor, say aye. Anyone opposed? We have an amended motion. So going back to the main motion, Deputy, did you want to come back?
Yes, I do. I do want to come back because I think, what was I talking about? Social transformation. So we were talking about social transformation. That is one of the biggest impediments to seeing a movement go forward and seeing the progress, because we need to have the society believing that this about ways that, other examples of social marketing that has worked in the past, whether it's drunk driving or seatbelt use. It kind of goes back, and see, Emma, kind of goes back to what Emma was saying about the incentives. Like, it's great to give people the incentive, but they need to have the reason to do it. They have to be compelled to do it. And I feel like we need some more tools in the toolbox. I don't know what they are, but perhaps during this committee of the whole, we can dig into that a little bit and find out what those tools are, because the incentive approach is great. But as we've noted, it's difficult for folks to be able to go through all the documentation and all the, different process and try to figure the process to be able to take advantage of a program, and then they didn't meet the deadline, and then they didn't access it, right? And then they feel like, well, I'm no longer motivated to do this. They're disincentivized. Do you know what I mean? So is there some thinking, some planning around putting more tools in that toolbox and shifting towards less incentive and more compelling? Because again, social transformation doesn't happen unless there is a specific reason to drive that change. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, through you to the councillor, yeah, we think about this a lot, and I think it really, right now, is a capacity question, and also a bit of a roles and responsibilities, because we have corporate communications that manages, all of our corporate messaging across all issue areas, all media requests, everything, which is a little bit different than something like climate change, where you need constant work and attention paid to messaging, and it's not just messaging, it's motivating, it's compelling, it's kind of trying to compel people to see things the way we are seeing them around climate, right? It is more of a kind of social-based community marketing type of approach, which is a training that's actually really good that was used for waste diversion here,
right.
By that professor that he's still doing those trainings actually. Dr. Mackenzie Moore, I think is his name. So I agree that I think we need more than maybe a traditional comms plan with some social media and like the timing, you know, it's Earth Day. I think we need something more concerted across the board around climate for sure. And I think it's not just us. I think it's kind of multi-stakeholder that needed. And we have been dreaming about different ways that we could do this with the people that we had on contract. And I will be circling back and making them watch this video so that they can give me their food for thought after listening. But we talked a lot about we had a meeting actually with social media influencers in the summer that are not climate focused. One was, but most weren't, to say, would you be interested in using your social media influence for something like the climate movement? Right. Like we've been, you know, and then we talked about like what kind of web presence do we need? Because right now where the climate plan is not easy to find. It's, you know, it's kind of the corporate way of presenting information. Is there something that's more community focused or even publicly like multi-user, where you can input and output information? We had a hackathon that kind of had people come up with some ideas around this, and we're trying to support those winners of the hackathon going forward. The Innovation Outpost has a new manager now, Patrick Farrar, and we've met with him a couple times and are starting to dig in again. And when we get our engagement person, we'll be able to really start dedicating some thinking to this. But yeah, we're in very early stages of that.
I think that's what we need. We need a new approach to comms and away from the corporate communications approach and more towards the social action and transformation approach. So thanks. I look forward to seeing that work.
Thank you, Deputy. Still on main motion. We see, you're in, you're out. Nope. Just messing with me, aren't you, the Vice Chair? Messing with me. See no others, you know, just very quickly, and then we'll go to the vote. You know, Shannon, in your presentation, unique opportunity to do things differently. That's where we are right now. I agree wholeheartedly. Acting now will save dollars, prevent loss, preparing communities, improving well-being. That's the communication we need to get out there. And I agree, in all due respect to corporate comms, they don't get it. It has to be different. They truly don't get it. You know, it needs to be, we need to have a separate web page. We need to have maybe an ad agency involved to get this message out, somebody that gets it. And so the scorecard is going to be important after this year. The results, the ROI, the return on investment is the key. Right now, you see the theme with Emma's presentation earlier and this one, communication. Communication to get the understanding why people like Mr. Gaudette steps up and he understands it. How do we get others to understand it? Right now, there is that lack of understanding. So, seeing no others on the board, we'll call for the question on the main motion that's been amended. Question's been called for. All those in favor? Anyone opposed? That motion is carried. Shannon, thank you very much to you and your team. It's nice to say a team because the team was Shannon before. So there actually really is a team now, so that's fantastic. Truly appreciate your work. You know, I'm a little disappointed that Councillor Morris didn't mention her daughter, because it's people like her daughter that motivates myself and many of us on council when it comes to this topic. And so there is anxiety when it comes to climate change. So Shannon, thank you so much. Let's see where we are, folks. There are no motions. We have no in camera. There's no added items. Any notice of motions, colleagues? Seeing none. Public participation we did earlier. The next meeting, if needed, is January 13th. So before we go to adjournment, I personally want to wish everyone a wonderful holiday, Joyeux Noël, Bona Natalia, whatever your faith may be. The pandemic is true and still part of our lives, and be careful out there. Embrace your family, those that you're allowed to, at least because of this pandemic. And so please do take some time to take a breath. We all need it in this room for sure. So all the best to everybody. Could we have a notice of adjournment by the deputy? And so thank you very much. All the best to staff also. Thank you very much for your dedication.